I wasn't supposed to be in Charleston that weekend. My flight had been rerouted because of a storm system parked over Atlanta, and instead of sitting in a conference room in D.C., presenting brand mock-ups to a client, I was stuck in a rental car on King Street with a dead phone charger and a gnawing feeling I couldn't explain. So I drove to my sister's house. Lina hadn't answered my texts in 4 days. That wasn't unusual for most people. But Lina was the kind of person who replied within minutes, always with a full sentence, never just an emoji. 4 days of silence from her meant something. I pulled into the long gravel driveway of the Ashford house just after noon. The place looked like it belonged on the cover of a real estate magazine. White columns, black shutters, boxwood hedges trimmed with surgical precision. My brother-in-law Julian had inherited it from his father, and his mother Patricia had been decorating it like a museum ever since. Every window gleamed. Every flower bed was color-coordinated. But the front door was unlocked, and there wasn't a single car in sight. I let myself in and called out. Nothing. The house smelled like lemon polish and something faintly stale underneath it, like food left too long on the counter. I found a plate of toast on the kitchen island, barely touched, cold, with a glass of water beside it. And then I heard it, a sound from upstairs, low and broken, like someone trying to cry without making noise. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The master bedroom door was cracked open. Inside, Lina was sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub, holding a towel to the side of her head. Blood had seeped through the fabric and dried along her jawline. Her left eye was swollen shut, ringed in deep purple and green. She looked up at me and said, very quietly, "Please don't call anyone." I knelt beside her. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice level. "How long have you been sitting here?" "Since last night," she said. I got dizzy and hit the edge of the counter. I looked at the counter. There was no blood on it. There was no mark, no chip, nothing. I looked back at my sister, and she looked away. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I found out the truth right then, but because I realized how long the truth had been hiding in plain sight, and how many people had helped keep it there. I cleaned the wound myself. It wasn't as deep as it looked, but it needed butterfly strips and probably stitches. She wouldn't let me take her to the ER. She kept saying Julian would be upset if anyone saw her like this. I asked where he was. She said Richmond, a legal conference, and then added, almost like an afterthought, that Patricia had stopped by that morning to drop off groceries but left before checking on her upstairs. She knew I wasn't feeling well, Lina said softly. I told her I was lightheaded yesterday. She said I should drink more water and stop being so fragile. Fragile! That word landed like a stone in my chest. I got Lina cleaned up and settled onto the bed. She fell asleep almost instantly, which scared me more than the wound itself. I sat beside her for a while, watching her breathe, and then I did what I'd been trying not to do for the last hour. I started looking around. I wasn't snooping. I was searching. There's a difference when you find your sister bleeding on a bathroom floor, and nobody in a $4 million house seems to know or care. I started in the nightstand. Prescription bottles, 3 of them, none with her name on them. All prescribed to Julian, all sedatives or anti-anxiety medications, all half empty. Beside them was a small leather planner, the kind Lina used to keep religiously in college. I opened it. The first 20 pages were blank. Then, on a random Wednesday, 6 months ago, she'd written in tiny, careful handwriting. He said I imagined it again. I didn't imagine it. I sat on the edge of the bed with that planner in my hands and read every single entry. There weren't many, maybe 30 over 6 months. But each one was a tiny window into something I hadn't wanted to see. He moved the money again. I don't know where. Patricia told the neighbors I've been unwell and shouldn't be bothered. He took my car keys. Says I'm not safe to drive right now. My name isn't on the house. I asked and he laughed. The last entry was from 2 days ago. If something happens to me, look in the piano bench. I set the planner down carefully. My pulse was hammering, but my mind was cold and focused in a way it hadn't been in years. I went downstairs. The Ashford family piano sat in the formal living room, like a monument to taste and tradition. A Steinway grand, polished to a mirror shine, probably played twice a year at Patricia's holiday gatherings. I lifted the bench seat. Inside, beneath a stack of yellowed sheet music, was a manila envelope. No label. I opened it and pulled out 3 documents. The first was a quitclaim deed, signed by Lina 8 months ago, transferring her interest in the house to Julian and Patricia. The second was a revised life insurance policy, naming Patricia as the sole beneficiary, not Lina's daughter Rosie, not me, Patricia. The third was a notarized power of attorney, granting Julian full control over Lina's medical and financial decisions, citing a history of psychological instability and erratic behavior. I read that last line 3 times. Psychological instability. This was my sister, who graduated summa cum laude from the College of Charleston, taught 3rd graders how to read for 6 years, and had never raised her voice at anyone in her life. And they'd built a paper trail to make her sound incompetent. I photographed every page, uploaded them to my cloud. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. When I went upstairs, Lina was awake. She was sitting up in bed, holding a cup of water with both hands, staring at nothing. I sat beside her and didn't say anything for a long time. Then I asked, as gently as I could manage, "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. She took a sip of water, set the cup down, and said, "Do you remember when Rosie was born?" I nodded. Julian wasn't at the hospital. He'd said it was a work emergency, but Patricia had posted photos from a garden party that afternoon. I'd been furious. Lina had told me to let it go. "It started before that," she said, "but it got worse after Rosie." Patricia told Julian I wasn't fit to handle the finances anymore because I cried too much. And Julian, She paused. He agreed. He always agrees with her. At first it was just the bank accounts. He consolidated everything into one joint account, then moved it to an account in his name only. He said it was easier for taxes. I believed him. Then it was the car. He said I'd been driving erratically, that the neighbors had complained. I hadn't driven anywhere in weeks except to school. Then it was the house. He brought home the paperwork one night and told me it was just estate planning. I didn't read it. I trusted him. Her voice cracked on the word trusted, the same way it always did when she was trying to hold herself together in front of me. She'd been doing it since we were kids. The responsible one. The one who absorbed the blow so nobody else had to feel it. "What about Rosie?" I asked. "She's fine," Lina said quickly. Then, quieter, "Patricia takes her on weekends now. Says I need rest. But when she comes back, she says things. 'Mommy, Grandma says you're sick. Mommy, Grandma says I might live with her someday because you need help.'" I felt my fingernails pressing into my palms hard enough to leave marks. A 3-year-old. They were conditioning. A 3-year-old. Lina looked at me, and her expression shifted into something I hadn't seen before. Not sadness, not fear, but the kind of exhausted clarity that comes right before someone either breaks completely or decides to fight. "I didn't put those papers in the piano bench for safekeeping," she said. "I put them there for you, in case you ever came looking." The next morning, I called a family law attorney named David Chen, whose name I'd gotten from a college friend who'd been through her own ugly divorce. I didn't tell him everything on the phone, just the broad strokes. Financial isolation, forged or coerced legal documents, a pattern of control escalating over 3 years. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "How soon can you bring her in?" I drove Lina to his office that afternoon. Rosie stayed with me at my hotel. She spent the whole drive rearranging the crayons I'd bought her into color order on the back seat, narrating quietly to herself. "Red goes here, because red is bossy. Blue goes at the end, because blue is calm." I watched her in the rearview mirror and thought about what kind of world she'd grow up believing was normal if nobody intervened. David's office was small, on the 2nd floor of an old brick building near the harbor. He was methodical. He didn't rush Lina. He asked questions and waited for her answers, even when the answers took a long time to come. When she showed him the planner entries and I showed him the photos of the documents, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This is textbook coercive control." The property transfer alone could be challenged given the circumstances, but combined with the power of attorney and the insurance change, we're looking at a pattern that any judge in this state would take seriously. Lina nodded slowly. "But what about Rosie?" she asked. "That's what they'll use. Patricia will say, 'I'm unstable.' Julian will say I'm emotional. They've been building that story for years." David looked at her steadily. Then we build a better one. One that's true. That evening, I went back to the Ashford house alone to pick up clothes for Lina and Rosie. The house was still empty, still gleaming, still silent in that unnatural way that expensive houses can be when nobody's really living in them. I packed 2 bags quickly. I grabbed Rosie's stuffed rabbit from her crib and Lina's reading glasses from the kitchen counter. And then, on my way out, I noticed something on the hallway table I hadn't seen before. A printed email, face up, from Patricia to Julian. The subject line read, "Timeline for next steps." I picked it up and read it standing in the doorway. "Julian," the email began. "I've spoken with Dr. Hargrove, and he's prepared to provide a written evaluation if needed. Given Lina's recent episodes, I think we should move forward with the temporary custody petition before the end of the month. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes to frame the narrative correctly. I've already spoken with Judge Whitmore's clerk at the Garden Club luncheon, and she's sympathetic. Also, please remind Lina to sign the updated insurance addendum. Tell her it's for Rosie's college fund. She won't question it. She never does." I read it twice. The second time, my hands were so steady it surprised me. There's a kind of anger that goes past shaking, past heat, into something crystalline and precise. I took a photograph of the email and left the original exactly where it was. When I got back to the hotel, Lina was giving Rosie a bath. I could hear them through the bathroom door, Rosie splashing and giggling, Lina singing something soft and off-key. I sat on the bed and stared at the photo on my phone. She won't question it. She never does. Those 7 words contained an entire marriage, an entire philosophy of control. Not violence, not screaming, just the quiet, systematic erosion of a person's ability to trust her own mind. I forwarded everything to David that night. His response was brief and immediate. "Don't confront them. Don't change your routine. We file Monday." The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went back and forth between my hotel and the Ashford house, helping Lina maintain the appearance of normalcy while David's team prepared the emergency filings. Julian came home from Richmond on Sunday evening. He walked through the door with a bottle of wine and a box of pastries from Patricia and kissed Lina on the forehead like nothing was wrong. I watched from the kitchen doorway. He glanced at me with that polished smile he always wore, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Didn't know you were in town," he said pleasantly. "Storm rerouted me," I said. "Thought I'd spend some time with my sister." He nodded slowly, still smiling. "Well, that's nice of you. She could use the company. She's been a little off lately." "A little off." I smiled back and said nothing. Monday morning, David filed a petition for emergency protective order, a motion to freeze all joint and individual assets, and a challenge to the validity of the quitclaim deed and power of attorney on grounds of coercion and undue influence. He also filed a report with the Department of Social Services documenting the pattern of isolation and financial abuse. By noon, Julian had been served. I was at the hotel when Lina called me, her voice thin and shaking. "He's at the house. He's screaming." I told her to stay where she was, lock the door, and not open it for anyone. Then I called David, who called the police. When officers arrived at the Ashford house, Julian was in the driveway on the phone with Patricia. He was composed by then, jacket on, voice measured. He told the officers it was a misunderstanding, a family disagreement blown out of proportion by an emotional sister-in-law. The officer looked at the paperwork, looked at Julian, and said, "Sir, there's a court order here. You need to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Julian stared at the paper like he'd never seen a document he hadn't drafted himself. Then he looked past the officer, directly at me standing near my car across the street, and said, "Loud enough for me to hear, you have no idea what you've started." I did, though. That was the thing. I knew exactly what I'd started, because I'd spent 5 days watching what silence looked like from the inside, and I was done. Patricia's response came the next day, and it was exactly what David had predicted. Not a phone call, not a visit, but a letter from her own attorney, hand-delivered to David's office, accusing Lina of emotional instability and requesting an emergency psychiatric evaluation before any custody decisions were made. Attached was a statement from Dr. Hargrove, the family physician Patricia had mentioned in her email, claiming he had concerns about Lina's mental fitness based on several recent appointments. David showed me the letter over coffee. He was calm. "This is their playbook," he said. "Discredit the wife, medicalize her emotions, get a friendly doctor to rubber stamp it. But here's the thing." He pulled out his own folder. "I subpoenaed Lina's actual medical records this morning. She hasn't seen Dr. Hargrove in over 18 months. Whatever evaluation he's claiming to reference doesn't exist. And that email you photographed, where Patricia admits to coordinating with a judge's clerk, that's not just unethical. In this state, that's grounds for judicial misconduct review." For the first time in a week, I felt something other than fury. I felt traction. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Lina didn't want to go. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed that morning, with Rosie in her lap, braiding the little girl's hair with trembling fingers, and said, "They're going to twist everything. They always do. They'll make me look crazy in front of a room full of strangers." I knelt in front of her and waited until she looked at me. "You walked into that house at 25 years old believing you'd found a family," I said. "They spent 7 years making you believe you were the problem. You're not. You never were. And today, you don't have to be loud. You just have to be honest." She held my gaze for a long time. Then she nodded once, wiped her eyes, and stood up. The courtroom was small and beige, the kind of room where lives get reshaped in fluorescent lighting. Julian sat on the opposite side, with 2 attorneys and Patricia directly behind him in the gallery, wearing a cream-colored suit and an expression of wounded dignity. She'd brought a leather binder, and I noticed her flipping through pages of what looked like printed screenshots and notes, her own narrative, rehearsed and organized. Lina took the stand first. She spoke softly but clearly. She told the judge about the bank accounts, the car keys, the documents she'd signed without reading because her husband told her it was routine. She described the isolation, how Patricia had gradually replaced her at school pickups, at doctor's appointments, at Rosie's first birthday party, where Lina had been seated at the far end of the table while Patricia cut the cake. She talked about the planner, the entries she'd written late at night when everyone was asleep, her only record that she wasn't imagining things. Julian's attorney cross-examined her with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before. "Isn't it true you've struggled with anxiety? Isn't it true you voluntarily signed the property documents? Isn't it true your mother-in-law has been a supportive presence in your daughter's life?" Lina answered each question without flinching. "Yes, I have anxiety. My husband told me it meant I couldn't be trusted with money. Yes, I signed the documents. He told me they were for estate planning, and I had no reason to doubt him. Yes, Patricia is present in Rosie's life. She's present the way a warden is present in a prison." The courtroom went quiet after that. Even Julian's attorney paused. David presented the evidence methodically. The photograph documents, the email from Patricia to Julian outlining the custody timeline, the fabricated medical evaluation from Dr. Hargrove contradicted by actual medical records, the power of attorney signed under coercive conditions. Each piece laid down like a brick in a wall that Julian and Patricia couldn't talk their way around. When Patricia's name came up in connection with the email to the judge's clerk, her attorney objected. The judge overruled and asked to see the email. She read it silently, then looked up at Patricia over the rim of her glasses. The look lasted about 3 seconds, but it said everything. The judge ruled that afternoon. Temporary sole custody to Lina. Asset freeze on all accounts pending full financial review. The quitclaim deed suspended for investigation. A referral to the State Bar regarding Dr. Hargrove's statement, and a separate referral to the Judicial Conduct Board regarding the contact with Judge Whitmore's clerk. Julian stood when the ruling was read. His face was blank in that particular way of someone who has never been told no in a room that mattered. Patricia didn't move. She sat perfectly still with her leather binder closed on her lap, staring straight ahead like a portrait that had just been taken off the wall. We walked out of the courthouse into that pale autumn light Charleston does so well, the kind that turns everything gold for about 20 minutes before dusk. Lina stopped on the steps and took a breath so deep her whole body lifted with it. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," I said. "But it's yours now." She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my sister. Not the version Julian had sculpted, not the quiet wife Patricia had trained, but the girl who used to argue with our dad about politics at the dinner table and build elaborate blanket forts for me when I was scared of thunderstorms. Rosie tugged on Lina's sleeve. Mommy, can we go to the park? Lina smiled. A real one, crooked and unguarded. Yeah, baby, we can go wherever we want. 3 weeks later, Lina signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in West Ashley. It had creaky floors, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a backyard barely big enough for a swing set. She signed her name slowly, pressing the pen down hard, like she wanted to make sure the ink would never fade. I'd never seen anyone look so proud of a signature. That first night, after Rosie was asleep in her new room with the rabbit and a nightlight shaped like a moon, Lina and I sat on the back steps drinking cheap wine from mugs because we hadn't unpacked the glasses yet. The air smelled like salt marsh and somebody's charcoal grill. You know what Patricia said to me at our wedding? Lina said, staring out at the dark yard. She said, "Welcome to the family. We take care of our own." She paused. I spent 7 years thinking that meant something good. I didn't respond right away. I just sat with her in it. She turned to me eventually. Thank you for coming to Charleston. I didn't come to Charleston, I said. My flight got rerouted. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your eyes water. Right, she said. The storm? We sat there for a while longer, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of a train crossing somewhere on the edge of town. Nothing was fixed, exactly. There would be more hearings, more paperwork, more moments when Lina would freeze at the sound of a phone ringing. But she was here, in her own space, with her name on the door, and her daughter sleeping safely 10 feet away. Some stories don't end with the villain in handcuffs or the heroine standing on a stage. Sometimes the ending is quieter than that. Sometimes it's a woman pouring wine into a coffee mug on the back steps of an apartment she chose herself, laughing at a joke about bad weather, finally free to be as loud or as quiet as she wants. So here's what I want to ask you. If someone you loved went silent, not for a day, not for a week, but slowly, over years, would you notice? And if you noticed, would you show up? Let me know in the comments. And if you think stories like this need to be told, hit subscribe, because this isn't the last one.